Why does the tank role in Overwatch get flamed the most? Well, let me explain. First, I do want to say, stop flaming people, just in general. No matter how bad a teammate is doing, focusing on yourself and finding a way to blame yourself for every single mistake will cause you to have a much better experience and be a lot more humble overall. Now, why are tanks usually the brunt of most of the hate? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One of the biggest ones is, well, there's only one tank. If you've ever played tank in 6v6, you'll notice that you don't get targeted nearly as much as in 5v5. The reason this happens so much in 5v5 is that every other role has two players. So if one support or one DPS is doing bad, it can have a multitude of reasons. And it might just be because the other DPS or the other support is carrying. It's also usually too much to think about for someone who's raging and on their way to blame their team after inting into the enemy's backline for the 15th time this round. Along with this, most people go to stats to flame. Stop doing that, stats don't matter. But I found that tank stats can be all over the place. If they're high, usually that means that the tank was picking up for a teammate's mistakes. And even when they're low, I found that the tank can still be doing extremely vital things for the team. This leads me on to my next point. Tanks do a lot for the team that isn't stat-based. One of the easiest examples of this is making space. If a Ramatra is walling off the enemy team in ways that make him back off, if the enemies aren't shooting his shield, he might be able to do this without getting any stats, even though he's doing arguably one of the most important things to winning a point. Another thing that tanks do that is very important and doesn't have any stats is staging. If a tank stages a dive for their team and gets a successful dive that takes out the entire enemy team, they, in the end, might not have gotten that many kills during that dive. They might have only gotten, say, a pick, or they might have distracted for their team during the dive. And in the end, their DPS might have done most of the kills and most of the work, at least most of the visual work. While, sure, the DPS did get most of the kills in that fight, they wouldn't have been able to have that fight if the tank hadn't staged for them, which just shows that even if they don't get any stats, they're doing important things. Another thing I realized with tanks that doesn't really cause them to get flamed, but rather their supports, is that people don't really look at the mitigated stat. A tank can be blocking 12k damage in a game, and your supports could only have 8k healing, which seems like the supports aren't doing that much healing, but if they didn't have any mitigated, the supports would probably have around 14k healing. So even if the supports have low healing and you guys are still winning the game, maybe just look at the mitigated stat. Maybe realize that that mitigated stat is basically equivalent to how much damage your supports would have to heal if the tank wasn't there. Along with this, I'd even argue that mitigated is most of the time more important than healing, purely because if a tank mitigates damage, that means that your support doesn't have to heal that damage, meaning they can stay on whoever they're pocketing or whoever they're currently healing. If that tank wasn't there to mitigate it, and say your DPS behind you took, 200 damage, that support would have to heal that DPS or they would die. Along with that, if they were already healing a different DPS, that other DPS might now die because they're no longer getting healing. So just think about that when you're looking at stats. You shouldn't look at stats in the first place, but if you do, make sure to think about mitigated as more important than healing. Along with that, really quick, I do want to reiterate some points from my stats video. If you do look at stats as a reason to flame others, you are the problem. If you flame others at all, you're the problem. And hell, I'm no stranger to this. The amount of times I type back at someone being a douche in team chat is way too many to count. Yet every time I do, I look back at the game and realize just how much I would have benefited if I just ignore them. Usually by responding to someone who's flaming you or by flaming someone else, you become tilted or you might not be as focused on the game as you might have been without responding to them. So please just don't respond. Ignore the people who you think might be doing good and focus on yourself. There will always be people in any team game that look for a reason to not blame themselves. So just keep a calm head while dealing with these people and move on to the next game. On to the next reason. The tank is most of the time in front. Simply put, the tank is always in front of attention. No matter how good you are doing as tank, if you mess up one thing, it's broadcast to everyone behind you, which just makes it way easier to point out any mistakes that you possibly may have made. The best way that I've found to avoid this and avoid getting flamed for this is just know when you do something wrong. If you accept that you messed up and even agree with the people who are flaming you, it'll help you see what you're doing wrong easier and hopefully stop them from flaming you, at least for the rest of the game. If you return anger with anger, it just makes everything worse. Either don't respond or respond calmly. Along with this, I believe tanks are held to impossible standards. If a DPS dives the enemy backline and dies, they can come back rather fast and make up for their mistake. If a support gets picked out of position, the other support can usually help the team back away. But if a tank does one thing wrong, their team collapses and causes the team fight to be over. As an extension to this, if a tank doesn't pick up for their teammates' mistakes, then they're throwing in the eyes of everyone else. If a DPS doesn't do enough damage, it's not on them to do better, it's on the tank to pick up for the missing damage. And this is where I find most people's hatred for playing tank comes from. No matter how bad your team is doing, you are always expected to do better. Even if you're doing 90% of things right, that 10% causes everyone to ignore the 90%. Another thing that I think causes so much flaming is that tank is innately hard. There are so much you have to do every game that most players don't even know. Most tank players are just DPS players who got forced to play tank by their DPS friend because having a bad tank feels like the end of the world. Tank can't be that hard though, can it? Well, let me put it into perspective. If you're a hit scan DPS, all you really have to improve at is accuracy, and you'll usually get to at least diamond. With support, you can heal bot all the way to plat. You'll get stuck around there though. With tank, you have to focus on your whole team. You have to make sure your abilities can keep everyone around you alive. You have to constantly be thinking about your position. 1 second out of position is damage that your supports have to heal, which might cause a DPS to die as a result. Along with this, if your team doesn't synergize with you, you have to adjust your playstyle. If you're a DPS and your tank doesn't play well with you, you barely have to do anything to change to help. As a tank, you might have to play entirely different positions to keep your team alive. As an example of this, say you have a Genji and you're a Ram. If that Genji dives in and leaves just a little bit too late, you're expected to shield for them, Nemesis form to body block, or do something to take aggro from them, even though it was their fault. But then if they're playing Widow, you're now expected to block off sidelines and allow them to get picks, doing a completely different job than you were before. This brings me on to my next point. Your team comp can influence everything. If you're playing a Brawl tank, your team is supposed to go a Brawl comp, but if they're a Genji one-trick pony, good luck. Same goes for all other kinds of comps. If you're a Hazard man and your DPS are all poke heroes, they're going to get ran through whenever you try and dive. And guess who's taking the blame? You, of course. No matter who you play or how good you do, if your team doesn't play with you, it's going to make your life hell. If you make space and they don't take it, you're basically doing nothing, but it's not your fault, yet you're still going to get flamed as if you were the Antichrist himself. Overall, I feel that tank has an extremely high skill ceiling and along with that, a rather high skill floor. What this means is that while most tanks can be extremely good in the right hands, they can all be extremely useless in the wrong hands. This causes most low rank tanks to genuinely be bad, and most of the time they are at fault, but they still get insulted in higher ranks too. And that's where I find your position to be in play. You are always in the front of people and your faults are always in the forefront of anyone's view, meaning that you're going to get targeted first if you mess up, and everyone will see that you're the problem, even if they're doing the same things 2 feet behind you. I also feel that as tank, even if you are doing extremely good, your team doesn't realize what you're doing good. You could be making extremely good plays, placing your shields in places that keep your team alive, yet you don't get a stat for saving your teammate. You don't get that player's save stat that shows up in the end of the game. You don't get any of these cool flares that show that I'm helping the team. No one really sees when you're doing good. They only see when you're doing bad. And that's what makes tank so hard to play, is that no matter how good you're doing, people will only ever see your faults. And I truly do believe this is the case. If you get a 5k on Wrecking Ball, and then proceed to accidentally end the next fight, you're suddenly the reason why the team is losing and you will get flamed by every single person in the game and told to swap off immediately. That is another thing that I feel is an issue with tank. People seem to have this preconceived notion that tanks need to swap, which is just not true. Any tank in the game can be good against any other tank in the game. Well, sure, there are some tanks that get extremely hard countered by other tanks, like if you're playing Roadhog into a Mauga, then yeah, you should probably swap. But even then, if you're still winning, then you shouldn't swap. Yet no matter what, if you mess up even once, say in that example of Hog versus Mauga, if you're winning the entire game, yet one death from that Mauga, suddenly your entire team is yelling at you for still playing Hog into a Mauga, yet the entire rest of the time you were winning. Along with that, just in general, don't tell people to swap. That is an issue that I'm going to have to make an entire another video about, because counter swapping is just stupid. I know I did make a video about counter swapping and how it can be used as a tool, but I honestly have grown to disagree with even that. You should pick a hero and stick with that hero for at least a few weeks. That way you can get good against your counters. Learning how to play into your counters and how to win against them is crucial to being good with a hero. If you constantly swap off when you're getting countered or counter swap to them, then you're never going to become good at any hero. You're always just going to be slightly alright at almost every hero. And that's how I was for most of the time, until I just started playing Ramatra into everyone. That's when you learn that, guess what? You can play a Ramatra against a Hog. You can play him against anyone. No matter what happens, as long as you're just good with positioning and you know how to position against your counters, you win. So yeah, while most of the time it is the tank's fault, the only reason that it is that the standards for what classifies as a good tank is set so astronomically high that it is very hard to reach for most players. Tanks are expected to be perfect in every way, and when they mess up, that's seen as the reason the game was lost, even if the rest of the team was doing just as bad. And finally, I wanted to reiterate, please don't flame people. Even if your teammate entered, you did something wrong that game too. So please, Before being irritated by one's mistakes, evaluate your own mistakes and realize that both of you are one and the same. And if you fail to see your own mistakes, who are you to point out those of others? With that though, I hope all of you enjoyed this video, and I hope each one of you goes on to make this world a better place rather than one of hatred. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy, and check out the links in the description. Peace.